penitentiary of New Mexico is like prisons all over America, no better and no worse. The only difference is that this prison has an especially violent history. Like all prisons, this is a place of isolation and confinement, a place of solitude and despair. It is filled with anonymous faces, with names and lives reduced to numbers. What you see within these claustrophobic walls is the familiar routine of prison life everywhere. Frustration, boredom, uncertainty. What you don't see is familiar only to those who live here. Intimidation, fear, and violence. Prison is a place of darkness where much is hidden from society. But in 1980, the documentary film Doing Time cast light into that world of shadows here at the Penitentiary of New Mexico. The film offered a rare glimpse into the world of a very troubled maximum security prison. Just weeks after Doing Time was broadcast, the penitentiary exploded in a catastrophic riot, a rampage of unimaginable violence, which left 33 dead, hundreds injured, and the prison destroyed. The prison has been rebuilt, but in one old cell block, untouched since the riot, the scars from that terrible ordeal still remain. What you are about to see is the story of this institution and its people 10 years after the riot and 10 years after the making of Doing Time. This is the story about a decade of change, about loss and renewal, about despair and hope. It is a story about people who have returned to society and others who may never return. In 1980, this was maximum security at the Penitentiary of New Mexico. Its inmates were among the most dangerous and violent in the country. The film Doing Time took a hard look at the values, beliefs, and thoughts of the people who made up this institution. How they came to be here. How the experience of prison changed them. How they coped with their loss of freedom. The atmosphere in a maximum security prison is always tense, but it was especially so here in 1980, just before the riot. The penitentiary was understaffed and overcrowded with more than 1,100 prisoners. The pressure on both inmates and staff was enormous. The hidden tensions of prison life frequently erupted in violence, inmate against inmate. The risk of violence against some inmates was so great that they had to be locked away from the rest of the prison population. One entire cell block was used as the protection unit. For the inmates held here, prison life meant being confined to a single cell, virtually 24 hours a day. Life here was a daily agony of danger and violence, coupled with unending periods of boredom. The code of behavior in prison is something which can only be learned on the inside. For many people, the scars of prison are difficult or impossible to conceal. Prison becomes a way of life. Some of the men featured in Doing Time are still behind bars, but 4 of those who helped tell the story of life in maximum security are now out in the free world. Their decade of experience, both in and out of prison, helps cast some light on the riddle of human nature in this most explosive of settings.
A convict and an inmate carries themselves plumb different. It's just like me, I'm an outlaw. And I've always been an outlaw and always will be.
10 years ago, Raymond Robinette was serving time at the penitentiary of New Mexico for burglary and assault. Today, he still thinks of himself as a renegade. But for him, that no longer means leading the kind of life that first got him into trouble.
Since I've been out this time, I've settled down a lot. You know, I look at life a little bit more serious. I don't think I'll ever get back into crime like I was. You know, it'd have to be a hell of a change come over me before I, you know, compared to what I am right now.
This is Robinette's second parole since 1980, and he wants this one to last. He purposely took a job as an apartment manager, far away from the acquaintances and lifestyle which first helped land him in prison.
Whether you're in here or out there, you still do time. You know? It's just like a dude, he gets out of the joint, he goes back to his same hometown, same neighborhood, running with the same people. You know, all that's saying is bust me, you know. But they'll do it 3 or 4 times, you know, same thing.
A man comes into the joint, he's scared, he's going to do what he can to survive. When I first drove up, I made a knife. That was the first thing I did.
Robinette's cellmate, Shannon Kramer, was serving time for armed robbery. He was tough and outspoken 10 years ago.
You throw your pictures on the floor of your family. I found pictures of my family on a tier after a shakedown, walked on it.
After his parole, Kramer toured with the film Doing Time as part of an educational program designed to teach the public about the realities of prison life.
Some guys, you know, like a lot of guys, it's a revolving door. You know, some of those guys that are in that penitentiary, it's a way of life for them. You know, it got to be a way of life for me. You know, you can get real comfortable in there. Other than the lack of freedom.
Kramer found it difficult to stay out of trouble. He was sent back to prison twice before being paroled again in 1987.
You know, you really want to stay out here on the streets, and you're trying to get your life in order to where you can stay on the streets, which means a job, working, dealing with your family. You know, after not being with them for so many years, you have a whole rainbow of ideas and feelings that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I pick up a gun. Like, I carried a gun for a long time on the streets. I had a 25 automatic, a 45, a 22. Whenever I had one, I thought I was God.
Mike Rondeau was serving a life sentence in 1980 with little prospect of ever returning to the streets. But the experience of prison started a process of growth in him that radically changed his attitudes about life.
I just got tired of seeing the things that I saw. I got tired of seeing people being hurt. And I got tired of seeing people being hurt at my own hand. And I wanted to change that. I mean, I guess it's just going to be an inner thing that happens to people.
5 years after the filming of Doing Time, Rondeau did get his chance at freedom. He was paroled and got a job as a private security guard. He is determined to leave the more damaging lessons of prison behind him.
I was going to treat people the way I thought people ought to be treated, regardless of my fear, my paranoia, and everything else. And I guess that's what changed me, is I quit worrying about what other people thought about me, and I wanted to become what I wanted to be. And that was a person that cared about other people. And that's what changed me.
Keep your when I first came in the institution, of course, you're just kind of coming down out of the trauma from being in court. Being sentenced, and that in itself was kind of heavy on your head. Because for a time there, I felt like I was dead. Right? Just kind of cut out of everything you had in society.
10 years ago, David V. Hill viewed the world from inside his prison cell, where he was serving a sentence of 10 to 50 years. Prison for him was a bleak education, but today he's finding wide success as an artist.
I would say the main difference is between now and then, and me personally, is that then I was bound to my own hate by my capacity to lie to myself through intellectual rationale. Thinking that you're okay, but not being okay. Being sick, but thinking that you're well. I wasn't realistic enough or honest enough with myself to see it, admit it, and deal with it. Whereas now, I feel free.
Ten years ago, none of the men featured in Doing Time had any idea of what was to come. The prison was at the boiling point, crowded and dangerous, a place of frustration and anger.
Rehabilitation's out now, man. I mean, you're here to be punished, okay? And they don't make any bones about that anymore. I mean, that's a fact, okay? I can accept that fact, okay? I'm here to be punished because I committed a crime against society, and I got no bitch coming about that, okay? I'll do the time. But at the same time, I don't think that I should be abused or treated like an animal while I'm here. I'm still a man and I'm still a human being.
All inmates have complaints about life behind bars. Punishment, after all, is the purpose of imprisonment. But it wasn't the anger on the surface that made the penitentiary of New Mexico so dangerous. It was a violent rage festering deep inside, waiting to break loose, its pressure increasing every day.
You make it in here one way. You submerge everything you have, all right? You grab the mask off the wall in the morning while you're brushing your teeth and combing your hair. You make sure it's on real good, and then you walk out in that corridor. Whether it's a guard or another inmate, it doesn't matter because it's all underneath. You just smile at them, oh hi. It's all plastic. Everything's churning really deep down inside. Nobody's going to look at it because everybody's afraid after a while of what they'll find if they look too far.
The anger and frustration captured in Doing Time proved prophetic. Just after midnight on February 2nd, 1980, tensions at the penitentiary of New Mexico exploded in a 36-hour orgy of violence. 36 hours that would have a lasting effect on the people featured in Doing Time, both those trapped inside the prison and those who watched from the outside. The riot unleashed acts of unimaginable horror and devastation. These faces would forever change the way we look at prisons and the people in them. They would plunge our minds into the depths of the human soul. The riot started in a medium security dormitory. Just before 2 a.m., 3 officers were doing a routine count of the inmates. A 4th officer with keys to other parts of the prison stood guard at the entrance. Against regulations, he'd left the door ajar. Inmates hiding behind bunks jumped the officers and rushed the open door. They took all 4 guards hostage. They stripped, bound, and blindfolded them. Then the inmates fled the dorm, using the officers' keys to free other prisoners. Moments after the takeover began on that night in 1980, Ray Aguirre was returning from the prison hospital where he worked as an X-ray technician.
Before I got to the control center, I saw all the inmates coming at us, coming at me, hollering and holding knives and butcher knives and meat cleavers and extinguishers and pipes, and they were all hollering, let's take over, something to that effect.
Rioting inmates attacked the control center, the heart of prison security. They smashed through its bulletproof glass window. Officers inside fled for their lives. In just 22 minutes, inmates had gained complete control of a maximum security penitentiary. In cell block 1, Mike Rondeau was awakened by a friend pounding on his cell door.
And I opened it, and he says, we got to pray, things are coming down. And I said, what the hell is wrong with you, man? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And he says, look. So I looked out into the main corridor, and I mean, things were going crazy.
Fires were being set by rampaging inmates. By daybreak, the prison was ablaze. Inmates had also taken 11 officers hostage. Some were being raped and tortured, but the worst violence was yet to come. Raymond Robinette, released just 4 months earlier, had lived through other riots and understood what was going on inside.
Once a riot happens, and it's in full swing, it's like sharks. If you feed them, if you just pour blood out there, they go into a frenzy. In a riot, it's the same thing. It's like there for a while, everybody's insane.
Part of the insanity was drug-induced. Rampaging inmates broke into the prison pharmacy and consumed every pill in sight. Psychosis swept through the entire prison. Mark Orner knew many of those caught up in the riot, but even his experience as a prison psychologist couldn't prepare him for what he heard and saw during the riot.
I wasn't surprised that there was bloodshed. I was surprised at how much, and the viciousness and the anger, the hate that was unleashed. It was if you read a book and they describe what hate is, and there it was. Again, it was surprising, and I was thankful I wasn't inside.
The most hideous violence was unleashed here in cell block 4, where inmates were beheaded, castrated, mutilated.
All those things have stuck to my mind all these years, and I still have nightmares of the riot. I saw so many crazy things, things that were so barbaric, and I don't know. It shocks me that even convicts could act that way.
I can remember going through the corridors, stepping on bodies, and trying to find a way out, full of smoke. I can remember being in my own cell block and guys falling off the top tier, getting thrown off the top tier, and it was a pretty brutal mess.
Throughout the ordeal, bodies of the injured and dead were brought out one by one.
It's all plastic. Everything's churning really deep down inside. Nobody's going to look at it because everybody's afraid after a while of what they'll find if they look too far.
All the pent-up rage and frustration captured in doing time had exploded. And no one, not even this man, Tom O'Mara, could have guessed the depths of those emotions. O'Mara's sister, Kate, waited outside with the others for news of her brother.
The blood, I'll never forget how the blood looked in his hair. And I'm thinking, well, somebody tell me. I've been out there now. I've talked to people. Tell me how that happened. Tell me how it happened that he was with friends, that you were all watching each other, taking care of each other, and then all of a sudden my brother goes to lay down and somebody hits him in the head with a shovel and kills him. Tell me how that happens. You know, I don't understand how that happens still. I'll never understand it.
Even the passage of 10 years has not eased Kate O'Mara's anguish. Her brother's death, like much of what happened during that riot, remains a mystery. By Sunday morning, most rioting inmates had surrendered or been subdued. In the early afternoon, SWAT teams breached the main entrance and retook the penitentiary. Memories of the riot are still painful for those who worked in the penitentiary, like former parole board chairman Antonio Rivera.
Time has not softened my view of the February 1980 riot. I think about it. It's just something that I'll never forget.
Those who first entered the prison in the aftermath saw total destruction. They found hallways running 6 inches deep with blood and water, with bodies strewn everywhere. Gunther Hasselbauer, who served on the parole board with Rivera, was one of the first officials to re-enter the prison.
What I remember most about the riot is walking into the gate, the front part of the entrance, walking down the hall and seeing the first body by the control center, then another body, walking down ankle-deep water, and a lot of inmates being pushed out and SWAT team members running around, and then going into cell block 3 and 4 and just seeing the total chaos, the savagery. That was incomprehensible.
Did you see what was unleashed there? Did you see what they all had hidden in underneath, inside themselves? What did Tom say? He said, yeah, they don't want to look too close. They'd be afraid of what they see. Good Lord Almighty, I'd be afraid. I'd live in fear all my life to think that that should ever happen again.
13 also Maestas, Unit 7. 10-4, are you 1079 up there already? Sir, with 1079, sir. Thank you. 1019 cell block 6, you need to sign a conflict. Santa Fe PNM Control Center, all units to station, be advised, it is 11:27 hours. Santa Fe PNM is 1079 all areas. 328712.
What went wrong at the penitentiary of New Mexico in February 1980? How could such a devastating event happen? We may never know the complete story. Surviving even a day behind these walls means adapting to a way of life with its own logic, its own codes of behavior, its own rules. Some of those rules are set by the prison administration. Other rules, unspoken ones, are set by the inmates themselves. It is a delicate balance of power between inmates and administration. In a strange way, those behind bars have as much control of the institution as those on the other side, sometimes more. Most inmates want order maintained. They want to serve their time and eventually leave. Most will accept their punishment if they feel that they are being treated fairly with consistency and reason. If not, all the fences, guards, and guns in an institution are of little use. New Mexico's Attorney General concluded that the riot of 1980 was the final breakdown of this bizarre social contract between the keepers and the kept.
That's, to me, is like an albatross. It's a bad dream. New Mexico has paid a terrible price for that riot. No one can deny that it was a terrible experience. Probably one of the most bloody riots that has ever occurred in the history of corrections. But I think it's time we put all that behind us.
The riot forced the state of New Mexico to fix a number of problems at the penitentiary. The prison population was radically reduced at Santa Fe from 1,157 at the time of the riot to just over 450 today. The state built 3 additional prisons to house the overflow, 2 of them just outside the walls of the old penitentiary. Security around the perimeter was tightened with a double fence and massive coils of razor wire. Inside the prison walls, the recreation yard was expanded and improved.
All inmates in the yard, last and final call for canteen units 2, 5, and 6.
The cell blocks themselves have been upgraded. As a result of the riot, inmates are no longer housed in open dormitories. In each of the cell blocks, it is one man, one cell. The prison's control center, destroyed in the riot, has now been rebuilt. It continues as the nerve center of the institution. Inmates still pass the control center window, as they did before the riot, but metal bars now reinforce the bulletproof glass. Prison officials now regard the center as virtually impregnable.
Okay, people, again, the curtains in the cell blocks. I shouldn't have to be going into units taking down curtains. That's your responsibility. I want them down. I want everything off those grills.
None of the guards held hostage during the riot was killed, but they were unable to return to active duty. Their ordeal left an indelible imprint on the current force.
It's for your safety. You walk down the cell blocks, you need to be able to see into those cells. One of these days, one of you guys are going to walk up, pull a curtain aside, and walk in on something you don't want to walk in on. And then you're going to pay the price for it. Take those things down.
Today's force has nearly doubled, and correctional officers are better trained and better paid. Yet despite these changes, turnover is high. Prison can still be a dangerous place to work, especially here, where new recruits live with the legacy of the 1980 riot. The old image of the brutal prison guard is now out of date and out of favor with correctional officers, especially with the major in charge of security here, who understands the pressures of doing time.
The worst thing about doing time would just be having to look at the same four walls every day, go out and look at the same surrounding areas every day, and see that same fence in front of me every day. And personally, I don't think I could do time. If I had to do probably 5 years or longer, I'd try to go over the fence.
As serene as this recreation yard looks today, it still masks a violent reality. Despite an enormous investment in people and facilities, New Mexico struggles with the same problems faced by every penitentiary in America, including drug abuse, gang violence, and escapes. The reality of doing time has changed little over the years. The penitentiary itself has been improved, but the daily routine of prison life, the relentless boredom and the emptiness of endless days remains the same. Many of the people seen in doing time are still here. For them, life isn't much different than it was a decade ago.
I know one thing for sure, regardless whether you're guilty or not guilty, man, you're gonna get found guilty anyway, you know.
You are being charged with possession of intoxicant?
In 1980, Vicente Gonzalez was brought before the disciplinary committee on a common charge, brewing homemade liquor in his cell.
Whatever I say, I'm gonna be wrong anyway. The officer's right all the time. I'm just a number here, you know what I mean? And I'm not getting wise or nothing, but I'm telling you the truth about that report, because it wasn't no brew.
Moments later, in another room, Gonzalez admitted that it was homemade brew that he had gotten drunk on.
I had my fun, you know, so I don't care.
You know, you gotta do something wrong here anyway. You know, I can't blame a person.
10 years later, Gonzalez is once again in prison, this time for fraud and embezzlement. He kills time unwrapping cigarette packs, one by one. He sells the wrappers to other inmates who kill time by turning them into jewelry boxes and picture frames.
Well, for the past 22 years of my life, I've been in and out of this place with the exception of 8 years. So all my life has been doing time.
The cycle of crime and punishment is difficult for some people to break. They returned to prison again and again, finding life on the outside an impossible adjustment.
Most people are in the penitentiary because they lack one thing, and that's a sense of responsibility. And I would say that this institution perpetuates that irresponsibility on individuals.
By 1980, David Bearfield had already spent nearly 10 years behind bars.
They decide how much you can spend at the canteen. They decide when you'll eat. They decide when you'll see a movie. Well, see, you know, if you're treated like that and you become, you know, institutionalized without even being aware of it, then when you are released, you know, you have nothing to fall on. You know, you don't have any inner strength, you know. They're not going to come out there in the streets and wake you up at 7 o'clock in the morning so you'll be at your job.
When he was paroled in 1980, just 5 months after the riot, Bearfield was hopelessly unprepared for freedom. Shortly after his release, he got into trouble again. Facing a return to prison, he committed suicide. For inmates serving long prison terms, the future can be bleak.
If you're doing 5 or 10 years, you can see daylight. But if you're doing life or natural life or life in 50 or 2 or 3 lives, well, you know, then all you can see is midnight.
In 1980, Dick Busby was serving a life sentence as an habitual offender. His frustration about not having a release date has now been replaced by his desperate concern that he may not be able to succeed on parole.
I'm as afraid of that world out there as you are of this place here. And that's something that I hate to admit. But it's something that I have to admit.
Even though it's hard to imagine a tougher life than the one behind bars, the difficulties of adjusting to the free world can make prison life appealing, even addictive. And it's that security that Busby is afraid of losing.
When you're in one of these places, maybe you're not living the life of Riley. You know, everybody and their brother's not being treated the way they'd like to be treated. And you go to the mess hall, and every day you're not going to be fed everything you like. And all these officers aren't going to try and get along with you and treat you the way you'd like to be treated. But if you get real honest, you can do a lot worse. I have lived worse out there than I have in here.
Me, when I first came here, I was really young, you know, and I was scared half to death. Okay, I've been here 9 years now, and I've learned a lot, but most of what I've learned is negative things. I'm paranoid to a great extent now, because of being in here.
Ray Aguirre had already been in prison for 10 years when he was filmed in 1980. Today, he is still serving time, but in a special work program at a medium security prison. Aguirre had one chance on parole, but he made it for only 9 months before he was sent back to prison.
When I first came to the institution, I was 22. I had just turned 22 years old. And right now I'm 41, and I'll be 42 next month. So I you know, right now I'd say that 50% of my life has been spent in the penitentiary.
Aguirre is one of a handful of inmates who is trusted with training wild Mustangs here.
Most of the men that come out to work in the Mustang crew, they've been in the institution a couple of years, some maybe more than that. And as soon as they come out here, the first day they come out here, it's like a brand new world. They come out of the institution and they're free. There's no fences out there, and you do your work.
Aguirre is now getting close to a second chance at parole, and this time, the opportunity for freedom is far more precious.
There's no really one set thing I'm looking for. I'm just looking forward to being free. I'm just looking forward to going out there and being able to open a door by myself, not needing keys, not hearing bars clanging, doors clanging.
Anyone trapped behind these fences longs for freedom from the first day of his sentence. Unfortunately, the lessons of prison are mostly negative. Lessons about how to bury emotions, how to circumvent authority, how to escape responsibility. Most people leave this place hardened, churning inside with anger, frustration, and fear. But people still do their time, and most are eventually released from prison. The gateway to freedom for those who spoke to us 10 years ago was the crucial parole hearing.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hill. Just have a seat, please.
Board members faced the complex and often agonizing task of deciding if an offender was ready for freedom.
Your behavior and your conduct in this prison has been an exceptionally good one. You get tremendous recommendations from your caseworker. You get good recommendations from any number of people in this prison.
David V. Hill faced the parole board while doing a sentence of 10 to 50 years for rape. His memory of the experience is still vivid.
An inmate will spend hours each day thinking about that hearing for years in advance, talk to other parolees, try to understand the psychology of the board.
They knew exactly where we were coming from because word goes out through the inmate population very quickly, who's on the board, what their thinking is like, where they come from, what their they may be hard against drug addicts or sexual offenders, and they knew our reputation, and they prepared for the hearing.
There's the thought that you still have some type of problem and that you need to resolve that problem.
Being on the parole board was a real experience, and probably has been the most interesting experience in my whole life. I cared.
I don't ever really feel I'll resolve all the conflicts I deal with in life. In specifically addressing the conflict that I believe got me here to begin with,
I did know that the board was cunning and that they threw double-edged sword questions, meaning that regardless of which way you answered, they're going to come at you with a negative. That's the one kind of thing I've acted as a hang-up to me.
In the future, whenever you get out of the penitentiary, out of necessity, you're going to have to deal with women, whether it be a store clerk, a girlfriend, sisters, or anyone in the community.
We were just like them. People, human beings who are trying to make a difficult job as easy as possible, try to make right decisions, because we had to worry about the safety of the community, which was uppermost in our minds.
You are so firm and so sure in your mind that you will not ever commit another rape. Are you that sure?
He asked you the question, how do you know that you will never do this again? I could see from a chairman's viewpoint that being a very important question. But right away, what processed in my mind is that if I told him that I knew I wouldn't do it, he'd say, how can you predict the future?
I don't believe there is, sir. I believe there's, just because I feel confident about my life and just because I feel confident about my response to people doesn't mean I can prophesy the future. All it gives me is what I feel about myself now.
Parole was denied that time, but David B. Hill was eventually released. His talent as an artist and a newfound belief in himself and his work have helped guide him through the tough times of parole. When they return to the streets, most parolees are confronted immediately with problems they are poorly equipped to handle. Many are defeated by a bewildering mix of emotions, new people, and places. They return to prison either for violating parole conditions or committing new crimes. Shannon Kramer was first paroled shortly after the making of Doing Time.
I can remember going in front of the parole board, and it's difficult because you're thinking about all this freedom that you haven't had, and you're thinking about things that you haven't been able to do for a number of years, and So all of a sudden, they're going to open the doors and they're going to let you go.
For Kramer, the problems on parole started almost immediately.
It's extremely difficult when you come out on parole. And of course, not all the parole officers approach their clients in the same manner. They all have their little different attitudes that they want to project or to see how far they can push you. And the operative word there is push.
Early in his parole, Kramer tested positive for drug use and was placed under closer supervision.
They can push you.
Ray Robinette's parole also got off to a rocky start. He had given little thought to the future.
Now, for the first 4 months, I didn't do nothing but party. Nothing but party. I go to work maybe 3 days a week, you know, and then party the rest of the time. You know. And it was going from one group to another, you know.
But the thrill of freedom soon collided with the reality of daily life for Robinette. The toughness that allowed him to survive in prison caused problems on his first job.
I threw such bad vibes, man. After 3 weeks, my boss came up and told me, man, your attitude stinks, man. I gave you a chance for 3 weeks, and you just don't want to seem to talk around people, nothing, you know.
This is Robinette's second try on parole. His first one ended when he killed a man in a bar fight. After spending 12 years in prison, Mike Rondeau had trouble coping with life on the outside.
In 1985, I was released on parole. And whenever I hit the streets, it was a very big adjustment for me. Latter 86, I tried to take my own life. There was a lot of pressure on me. I didn't think that I was making it. So I put a hose in the back of my station wagon, locked all the doors, and kept the engine running. It's not an easy thing to try to make it on parole. It's not so much whether everybody's out in the world to get you. It's a personal thing. Can I make it? And at that time, I didn't think I was. So my fear of life became greater than my fear of death.
The haunting images we find in prison tell the story of the dreams, memories, and solitude of those who spend their lives in and out of the penitentiary. But the world of prisons and prisoners also takes its toll on the people who work here.
After working here and having the liberty to go home every day, I cannot conceive of how an individual who's ever been here once will ever commit a crime again and come back. It's just something I do not understand.
As a psychologist at the Penitentiary of New Mexico, Mark Orner spent much of his time evaluating inmates for parole. He had faith in people's ability to change, but more than once, even the most promising candidates for parole proved disappointing as they failed and were returned to prison.
Everything that I did at that time of the riot and the time that I worked in an institution was done with legitimate faith, legitimate trust, and a legitimate sense of trying to help somebody. I just don't think it's possible anymore. I would never do that again.
The thread is very similar.
Orner no longer works in corrections, but now teaches and has a private practice. His prison experience left him disillusioned.
People do change. Do criminals change? My feeling is no.
Orner's cynical view has much to do with this man and others like him who prove how difficult it is to predict or change human behavior. 10 years ago, Ralph Armstrong was serving time for rape. He was intelligent and articulate and took college-level classes while in prison. When paroled, he entered a graduate program in psychology at the University of Wisconsin. But in his first year, he brutally raped and murdered a young woman. He is now serving a life sentence for that crime. This kind of tragedy angers and frustrates anyone who has worked in the criminal justice system.
It burns you out. And it has a tendency to embitter you and say, what the hell with these goddamn people? I'm not going to turn them loose, let them stay in.
The judge gives them a sentence. Parole board says, you'll be getting out if we feel you're ready. It's so difficult to look in a person's mind and say, you know, I could see this halo over your head. You're ready to come out. You're never coming back. We don't have that magic.
No one really understands the mystery of human behavior. People react to the pressures of prison and parole in different and unpredictable ways. There is no way to know how each person will respond. If people do change their lives, it is for reasons deep within themselves, and it is a process that cannot be forced. The past decade has seen tremendous conflict, disappointment, and sometimes hope in the lives of those filmed in doing time.
I still feel guilty, feel sorry for the person that had took his life. I didn't know him, never seen him before in my life. He had a wife, numerous kids, a bunch of grandkids. I did a pretty heavy thing, you know, and that still bothers me.
Whenever I was in prison, at first I used to think, well, it's everybody else's fault that I'm here. And once I realized that it was my fault that I was where I was at, then I started realizing the people that I hurt. And when I began to realize the people that I hurt, then I started reevaluating my whole moral system.
Well, I turned myself in and I had a little bit of faith in the system, you know. I really did. And as soon as, you know, I felt, well, somebody would care, you know, somebody would really want to help. And one really, really kind of painful thing for me to realize is that nobody really does. I was wrong. In the long run of life, no prison guard, no therapist, no mommy or daddy or police officer or monitor is going to hold my hand 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there has to come some point at which I have to find it within myself to believe in myself.
They don't like us talking to you about this, you know, about the institution, because there's a lot of negative stuff here. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that people out there probably don't realize, you know. And we'll probably catch a little harassment. I think we already have caught it.
I think that I came out of prison not so much a bad man as when I went in, you know. But like I say, you have to work on that all the time. It's nothing that you can let get away from you, because especially in my case, if it gets away from me, then I can be down in the gutter in no time at all. Especially in my case. It doesn't take me long to get there.
A lieutenant standing right there at a broken window listening to everything that's going on. You know, they're going to know about it in 15 minutes. As far as being angry at society, like I used to be, think I got a raw deal and all that. I snapped, I got myself in all of it, you know. Ain't nobody up there holding a pistol to my head telling me you got to do it, you know. You know, I did it.
For Robinette, as for many of the people seen a decade ago, change has come at unpredictable moments.
It's something that has to come within yourself. You can sit and tell people about it all day, but until you're ready to change, or till you snap to the change, then it ain't gonna happen.
A person has to come to the point where they're tired of being an animal. They have to reach the point where they care about other people. They You have to care about the way other people feel. And nobody can make that change for you. I mean, it's something that you have to reach for yourself.
Everybody has to set up their own choices and their own commitments to themselves. And if they get through that and they keep those choices pretty much in line, then they'll make it out here.
10 years have passed since the film Doing Time first looked inside these walls at the often tragic realities of the prison experience. For the prison and its people, it has been a decade of turmoil. At the penitentiary of New Mexico, change has come at a terrible price. But the fires of destruction did not alter the nature of prison itself. Cell blocks like these are still places of danger and despair, just as they have always been. As a result, this prison, like prisons everywhere, will continue to be troubled. We may be able to build more prisons and better prisons, but the sad truth is that we may never do better than prison itself for some people. There are no easy answers to our questions about corrections, about when criminals should rejoin society, about how we can make them more responsible, or whether we might improve their chances in the free world. Little that we do seems to make much difference in the lives of these men. Time has taught us that change is slow and difficult. For each of those filmed in Doing Time, the struggle continues.
I learned that nobody's going to believe in me. I have to believe in me. And that is the real challenge.
David V. Hill has been released from parole. He has no current violations.
There's a few vices I ain't giving up. You know. I might give up a lot, but I ain't giving up my last few.
Raymond Robinette is on parole until the year 2012. He has no current violations.
I still have a lot of old values and ideas and beliefs that I'll never give up, though. And that's just me.
Shannon Kramer violated parole 8 weeks after this interview. His parole has been revoked, and he has been returned to the penitentiary of New Mexico.
I hope that in the future, 5 years from now, people will be able to say that Mike's a person that you can trust, that he's credible, he's dependable, and when you need him, he'll be there.
Mike Rondeau is on parole for life. He has no current violations.